The laughter hadn't even died down when I realized the joke was about me. It rippled through the elegantly decorated reception hall, a wave of polite, then slightly more enthusiastic, amusement. Champagne flutes chimed, a collective exhale of merriment. Greg, my new brother-in-law, stood beaming at the head table, microphone in hand, his arm around my sister, Sarah. Her smile was a little tight, I thought, but maybe I was just projecting. And then there's Anna, Greg continued, his voice booming slightly, amplified by the sound system. Sarah's big sister. Always so practical. I mean, who else would offer to catalog our wedding gifts during the honeymoon planning? Talk about efficiency. He chuckled, and the guests dutifully chuckled with him. We were trying to pick between Bali and Bora Bora, and Anna's there with a spreadsheet, asking about warranty cards for the blenders. It wasn't exactly what happened. I'd offered to help with the thank you notes, to create a simple list so they wouldn't forget who gave what, especially since they were leaving for their honeymoon almost immediately. It was a small gesture, born from a desire to be helpful, to alleviate some of their post-wedding stress. But in Greg's retelling, I became a caricature, the joyless, overly pragmatic older sister, a slightly comical impediment to romance. My cheeks burned. I tried to fix a pleasant, neutral expression on my face, the kind I'd perfected over years of navigating similar, subtly diminishing remarks. I glanced at my son, Leo. He was sitting beside me, meticulously neat in his little navy suit, a miniature version of the groomsman. At 9, he was often more perceptive than adults gave him credit for. His gaze, usually bright and curious, was fixed on his half-eaten roll, his small shoulders hunched just a fraction. He wasn't laughing. His fork, which had been enthusiastically poking at a piece of chicken, lay still beside his plate. I saw his small hand, resting on the crisp white tablecloth, slowly curl into a fist. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, but it clutched at my heart. This wasn't the first time Greg had done this, made a little jest at my expense, always framed as affectionate teasing. It was the kind of thing that, if you objected, made you look like the one with no sense of humor. He was charming, everyone said so. Successful, handsome, and he made Sarah laugh. But there was an edge to him, a way he had of subtly repositioning people in his narrative, always ensuring he came out on top, usually at someone else's slight cost. My cost, more often than not, it seemed. The memory of another gathering surfaced, unbidden. A family barbecue, last summer. Greg had just started dating Sarah seriously. He'd been holding court by the grill, regaling everyone with a story about a disastrous camping trip he'd taken. He'd glanced at me, stirring potato salad in the kitchen, visible through the open window, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, of course. Anna probably would have had a laminated itinerary and pre-packed emergency rations for every conceivable scenario. Some people just know how to take the fun out of spontaneity, right? Laughter again. I'd smiled, weakly, and continued stirring, the rhythmic scrape of the spoon against the bowl a counterpoint to the tightening in my chest. Leo, then 8, had been sitting at the picnic table, drawing. He'd looked up, his brow furrowed, then looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I'd offered him a reassuring glance, hoping he wouldn't absorb the barb. Now, in the warm glow of the reception hall, surrounded by fairy lights and the scent of roses, the familiar chill settled over me. It wasn't just the humiliation, though that was a bitter pill to swallow, especially on what was supposed to be Sarah's happiest day. It was the fear, cold and sharp, that Leo was internalizing this. That he was learning that his mother was someone to be gently mocked, someone whose efforts were punchlines. I remembered standing in the sterile, echoing hallway of the family court, years ago. The air conditioning was too cold, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the cheap, slightly too large blazer I wore. Leo's father, Michael, had been charming then too, in his own destructive way. His lawyer, smooth and confident, had painted me as unstable, overly emotional, unfit. I'd sat there, gripping my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking, listening to the careful dismantling of my character. My own lawyer, a kind but overworked woman, had done her best, but Michael's narrative was insidious. I hadn't screamed or cried or made a scene. I'd answered calmly, factually, my voice barely a tremor. I'd focused on Leo, on the worn teddy bear peeking out of the bag I'd packed for him for the supervised visit later that day. I remembered the worn patch on its ear, the result of countless anxious cuddles. That bear, that small, tangible symbol of my son's comfort, had been my anchor. I had to be strong, not for me, but for him. And I had been. I'd won custody, but the victory felt hollow, etched with the scars of those accusations. Greg's jabs were different, coated in faux bonhomie, but they landed on those old wounds, reminding me of how easily words could be twisted, how perceptions could be manipulated. The toasts continued. Sarah's maid of honor, a bubbly blonde woman I barely knew, gushed about Sarah's kindness. The best man told a few G-rated stories about Greg's college days. The room was warm, suffused with goodwill. I tried to breathe, to let the sting of Greg's comments fade. I sipped my water, the ice clinking against the glass, a small, sharp sound in the general hum. I risked another glance at Leo. He was still quiet, his eyes now darting between Greg, who was laughing at something the best man said, and me. His lower lip was caught between his teeth. I remembered him when he was smaller, perhaps 5, trying to carry a grocery bag that was clearly too heavy for him. His little face was screwed up with effort, his arms straining. I'd rushed to help, but he'd shaken his head, fiercely determined. I can do it, Mommy. I'm strong. He'd eventually managed, dragging it a few feet before I gently intervened, praising his strength. I didn't want him to see me as weak or as someone who didn't stand up for herself. But how did you fight shadows? How did you combat jokes that weren't quite insults, criticisms veiled as observations? Sarah caught my eye from the head table and gave me a quick, almost apologetic smile before turning back to her new husband, her hand finding his. Was she aware? Did she see the pattern? Or was I being overly sensitive, as Greg sometimes implied when I tentatively tried to address these things in private? Oh, Anna, don't be like that. It's just a bit of fun. You take things too seriously. That was his standard deflection. And I, wanting to preserve peace, especially for Sarah's sake, would retreat, the unspoken words lodging in my throat. The clinking of glasses again. Greg was back on the microphone. Just one more, folks, and then we'll get the dancing started. I just want to say, he paused, looking directly at Sarah, his expression softening. This, I thought, would be the heartfelt part. This would be about her. But then his gaze flicked towards me, a sly glint in his eye. I also want to thank Anna for being Anna. Someone's got to keep us all grounded, right? Even if it means reminding us about the practicalities when we're dreaming big. More laughter, softer this time, a little uncertain. He was painting me as the killjoy again, the sensible, boring counterpoint to their vibrant, exciting life. My stomach twisted. It was the accumulation, the relentless chipping away. Each comment, small on its own, built upon the last, creating a narrative I couldn't seem to escape. I thought of all the times I'd put my own needs, my own dreams, on hold. After the divorce, money had been tight. I'd worked 2 jobs for a while, the exhaustion a constant companion. My tiny apartment, which I'd tried to make bright and cheerful for Leo, felt miles away from the lavish lives Greg and Sarah were building. The walls were thin, and I remembered lying awake at night, listening to the city sounds, worrying about bills, about Leo's school shoes, about whether I was doing enough, being enough. The brightly colored, slightly too small superhero pajamas Leo wore then, passed down from a cousin, came to mind, a testament to making do, to finding joy in small things. I never complained. I focused on Leo, on providing stability, on showing him that love and resilience were more important than material wealth. And then, something shifted. Leo, my quiet, observant Leo, pushed his chair back. The sound scraped slightly against the polished floor, a small disturbance in the otherwise smooth flow of the reception. He stood up. He was small, even for 9, but there was a sudden stillness about him, a seriousness that made him seem older. My breath caught. What was he doing? My first instinct was to pull him back down, to whisper, "It's okay, sweetie, sit down." But something in his posture, in the set of his small jaw, stopped me. He walked, not quickly, but with a deliberate pace, towards the head table. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed ahead. The room, which had been buzzing with low conversation as Greg finished his remarks, began to quiet. Heads turned. Whispers started. "What's the little guy up to?" I heard someone murmur nearby. My heart hammered against my ribs. Fear, sharp and cold, warred with a sudden, fierce surge of protectiveness. What was he going to say? Was he going to cry? To yell? Greg looked down, a flicker of surprise, then amusement on his face. "Well, hello there, champ. You want to say something?" He still held the microphone. Leo reached the edge of the low dais where the head table was situated. He looked up at Greg, then at Sarah. His gaze was steady. Can I use that, please?" Leo asked, his voice small but clear in the sudden hush. He gestured towards the microphone. Greg's smile faltered for a split second. He exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Sarah. She looked uncertain, a frown line appearing between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. Sure, buddy," Greg said, recovering his affable demeanor. He leaned down and handed the microphone to Leo. It was almost as big as his head. Leo took it with both hands, his small fingers gripping the cool metal. He didn't seem nervous, not in the way I would have been. He seemed focused. He adjusted the stand slightly, bringing the microphone closer to his height. The room was utterly silent now. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant clatter of a plate from the kitchen. Every eye was on my son. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. "Please, Leo, please don't make things worse. Please don't be confrontational." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, sending a silent prayer into the universe. I thought of all the times I'd shielded him, all the times I'd bitten my tongue, all for his sake, to maintain a semblance of peace, of normalcy. He cleared his throat, a tiny, endearing sound amplified by the microphone. "Hi, everyone," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, though still boyish. "I'm Leo, and Anna is my mom." He paused, looking out at the faces watching him. I could see the chandeliers reflected in his wide, serious eyes. I held my breath. "My mom is really nice," he continued, simply. "She helps me with my homework, even when she's tired from work. She always reads me stories, even the same ones over and over if I ask." My eyes pricked with tears. This wasn't what I expected. "And she's really good at making things," Leo went on. "For my birthday, she made me a pirate ship cake. It had blue icing for the water and little Lego pirates. It was the best cake ever." He smiled, a quick, genuine flash of childish delight, and a few people in the audience let out soft, involuntary us. Greg was still smiling, but it looked more fixed now, less natural. Sarah was watching Leo intently, her expression unreadable. "When I was scared of the dark," Leo said, his voice dropping a little, becoming more earnest, "my mom would sit with me. She wouldn't just turn on the light. She'd tell me that the shadows were just sleepy things and that the moon was looking after us. She made it not scary." I remembered those nights. Leo's small, trembling hand in mine. The quiet murmur of my voice, spinning tales to chase away the monsters his imagination conjured. The feel of his head, heavy with sleep, eventually relaxing against my shoulder. Those moments of pure, unadulterated motherhood, precious and fleeting. And Leo continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, then settling for a moment on Greg, before moving to Sarah, and then, finally, to me. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw not defiance, not anger, but a profound, clear-sighted love. And when people say things that aren't very nice about her, even if they say it like a joke, it makes her feel sad. I can see it in her eyes. Even when she's smiling. The silence in the room was absolute. It pressed in, heavy and profound. Greg's smile had completely vanished. His face was frozen, his earlier joviality gone, replaced by a look of stunned awkwardness. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Sarah's hand, which had been resting on his arm, slipped away. She was blinking hard, her lips pressed tightly together. Leo wasn't finished. My mom is the kindest person I know. And she's really smart. She helped Aunt Sarah with lots of wedding stuff, not just lists. She helped her pick out flowers when Aunt Sarah was stressed, and she listened when Aunt Sarah was worried. She doesn't try to make things not fun. She tries to make things better. For everyone. He paused again, taking a small breath. So, I just wanted to say, thank you, Mom, for being the best mom, and Aunt Sarah and Uncle Greg. I hope you'll be really happy. And I hope you'll always be kind to my mom, because she deserves it. He looked down at the microphone for a moment, as if surprised by its presence in his hands. Then, carefully, he placed it back on the stand. He looked up one last time, a small, uncertain glance around the room, and then he walked, just as deliberately as before, back to our table. The silence stretched, thick and unbreachable. No one clapped. No one spoke. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. A server, poised to refill water glasses, remained motionless. Greg stood at the head table, looking utterly wrong-footed, his face flushed. Sarah stared straight ahead, her eyes glistening. I could see the faint tremor in her hands as they rested in her lap. Leo reached our table and slipped back into his chair beside me. He didn't look at me immediately, but picked up his fork and nudged a stray pea on his plate. He looked so small, so vulnerable, yet he had just performed an act of incredible courage, an act of pure, unadulterated love. Slowly, I reached out and put my hand on his shoulder. He leaned into my touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement. The spell in the room finally broke, not with a resumption of chatter, but with a few quiet coughs, a rustle of fabric as someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The band, cued to start playing, remained silent, looking towards the head table for direction that didn't come. Greg cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Well, he began, his voice strained, lacking its earlier confidence. Thank you, Leo. That was very heartfelt. He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He seemed to search for more words, but none came. He looked at Sarah, a pleading expression on his face. She didn't look back at him. I didn't care about Greg, or Sarah, or the stunned guests. All I could see was my son. My brave, beautiful boy. I slid out of my chair and knelt beside him. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide, a little apprehensive now, as if unsure of the fallout from his words. "Oh, Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. I pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his hair, which still smelled faintly of the coconut shampoo he liked. His small arms wrapped around my neck, holding on tight. I could feel the beat of his heart against mine, steady and true. "Are you okay, Mommy?" he whispered into my ear, his breath warm. "I'm more than okay, sweetie," I managed to say, my voice choked. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you." He squeezed me tighter. There was nothing more to say. He had said it all. He had spoken the truth with a clarity and sincerity that no adult in that room could have matched or dared to. He hadn't been cruel or accusatory. He had simply stated what was, what he observed, what he felt. He had defended me not with anger, but with love. He had reframed everything. I held him for a long moment, oblivious to the awkward silence that still hung over the reception. In that small circle of our embrace, there was only warmth and a profound sense of peace. The years of biting my tongue, of absorbing small slights, of trying to be the bigger person, suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a path that had led to this moment, to this incredible boy who saw me, truly saw me, and loved me enough to speak up. When I finally drew back, I looked into his earnest face. There were no tears in his eyes, just a quiet resolve. He had done what he felt he needed to do. The laughter hadn't even died down, but this time, it didn't come back. The forced merriment, the polite chuckles that had validated Greg's subtle dismissals, were gone. In their place was a new awareness, a stillness that spoke volumes. The spotlight Greg had so carefully managed had shifted, illuminating not my supposed inadequacies, but the quiet strength and unwavering love of a 9-year-old boy, and perhaps, just perhaps, the truth of the mother he was defending. I took Leo's hand. We didn't need to stay for the dancing. We had found our own quiet victory, not in speeches or applause, but in the unspoken understanding that passed between a mother and her son in a quiet corner of a crowded room.